Our genes are reflective of what we're eating. Our genes are modifiable and change their expression based on what we eat. So we're not looking at our genes to tell us what we should eat. We're eating to shape the development and function of our genes. And they work together, obviously, and the body has the ability to repair.
I've been able to partner with Mind Valley to present you guys free masterclasses between 60 and 90 minutes covering mind, body, soul, relationships, and conscious entrepreneurship, taught by spiritual masters, yogis, spiritual thought leaders, and best-selling authors. Just head over to nextlevelsoul.com/free. I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Joel Fuhrman. How you doing, Dr. Fuhrman?
Doing great, thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. You were an inspiration to me when I first started going down my plant-based, nutrient-dense diet change of over a decade ago now, and you've been tirelessly working at trying to get the word out. So hopefully we could get the word out even a little bit more in today's episode. So I do truly appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
So first questions, how did you start this journey into the understandings that you came to with nutrient-dense foods and plant-based foods and all that kind of stuff from, I'm assuming you didn't start off this way, that you kind of discovered this along the way?
No, I started this in my childhood, actually.
Okay.
My father was overweight and sickly. Mm-hmm. And I remember most of them spending when I was younger as a young teenager driving around with, he couldn't even sit up. He had to lie in the back of a wagon on a mattress. We drove him from doctor to doctor, to doctor visits and things. So he started picking up books, and as I did, to try to improve his health. I think I was 12 or 13 years old at the time. I think the first book we read was You Don't Have to Be Sick by Jack Dunn Tropp. He was a producer of Hapalon Cassidy in the 1950s or something, or the Lone Ranger or something, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And Jack died at the age of 96. He had 2 heart attacks before the age of 50. He was but he lived to be 96. I played him singles tennis when he was in his 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, but he would have lived longer if he wasn't so sick when he was younger. But I'm saying the average lifespan of humans should be between at least 96 and 107, for taking good care of our health. But then we started reading a lot of Dr. Shelton's works. Herbert Shelton, who wrote most of his works between 1930 and 1960. Mm-hmm. And so before I was born in 1953, Shelton wrote a bunch of books and wrote a newsletter for the American Natural Hygiene Society. He wrote a monthly magazine too. So my father changed his diet and lost weight and got healthier. And then we started eating differently as a kid. And then I was on the United States. I was a competitive figure skater. I was actually 3rd in the world in pairs figure skating. In the 1970s, I was 2nd in the United States in the 1973 national championships. So I was always in training, trying not to get sick, trying to get better stamina and strength. So we started cleaning. We're eating very healthy, very clean. We'd bring the Vitamix and make smoothies and blended salads. And so, and have, when I was in training, we'd have a whole bathtub full of food in the back of the car, eating huge amounts of food because we were training all day long, running and lifting weights and going to classes and skating hours each day. But subsequently in my career now, I've advised a lot of world-class Olympic athletes on how to never get sick. So they don't have to miss their training and miss their events and how to maintain performance. But it started out that way, a combination of my father's illnesses and myself and my sister trying to maintain and achieve greater stamina and performance. You know how Tom Brady and Venus Williams and all these top athletes, top tennis players in the world, they pay very close attention to their diet to maintain. Venus Williams was off the tennis tour for a few years with her Sjogren's syndromes and with her autoimmune condition. And she changed her diet to which is essentially the nutritarian diet, and got well and got back playing tennis again. And a lot of these athletes are prolonging their careers and maintaining their youthfulness by aging slower, by following either what I'm doing and utilizing my program or something similar to it. Even Alonzo, do you know who Alonzo Mourning is?
Of course, yeah, he's a Miami Heat guy.
Yeah, he had, when he was ending his career on the Miami Heat, he developed kidney disease. And his doctor contacted me, and Alonzo and his doctor, I gave them a diet so he would get rid of his kidney, so he would improve his kidney function, get rid of his autoimmune condition. And he made a complete recovery. He went from a really bad shape, a really unhealthy guy. He got in great health again. Now he's even thinner now and in better shape health-wise than he was towards the end of his playing career. You know what I mean?
So someone like Tom Brady, because I'm fascinated by Tom Brady, because he seems like unnatural, though he should be the most natural, if you will. But he seems almost mythical in how he's been able to maintain his body and he's still arguably the best quarterback playing the game. And he just, what is he, 44, I think, or 43? How's he doing it?
Yeah, and you know that if you notice it, he wasn't the greatest when he was 19 and when he was real young.
He wasn't even drafted, I don't think.
Right. He took time to develop his skills and his intelligence, and over time he developed his skills better and better as he got older, because that's what we're finding, that if you keep these athletes staying healthy and staying youthful, over time they get better and better, as opposed to petering out and burning out their careers because they're aging slow and they can maintain their, So yes, I think Tom Brady has his diet, compared to most other football players, has maintained his youthfulness, enabled him to keep training and using his brain and his growing knowledge about the game and improve his skills as he got older, because he maintained his youthfulness. He didn't age like other people did. And look at me, I'm 68, right?
Oh, wow. You look, wow.
And I can literally, I can ski moguls and do helicopters, and I was a good skier when I first started when I was 20 years old, because I was on the United States skating team. I could do that stuff. But when I got out of medical school in my 30s, and I was not in such great shape as I am now, what I'm saying right now is my skiing is better than it ever was. My tennis is better than it ever was. I'm faster on the court. I can ski down moguls the whole run from the top of the mountain down to the bottom at high altitude without getting tired. I can bounce around on moguls and take jumps and fly in the air. I'm as fit as I am now at 68 as I was in my 30s, or more fit, and my body fat's low, what is up. So yeah, I feel like I'm not, that my physical ability hasn't really aged much, even at 68,
That's just remarkable. Now, I wanted to ask you a question that a lot of people really hear these kind of words, but don't understand what they are. What is micronutrients versus macronutrients?
Right. Well, the macronutrients really means calories, because there are three primary macronutrients: fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And those are the only way we get calories: fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And I'm saying that the excess fat, the excess carbohydrate, and the excess protein, when we take in extra calories we didn't need, then it ages us, gets us overweight, and destroys our future health. I always say half of what people eat feeds their needs, and the other half feeds the needs of their doctors, which means that they're eating themselves into diseases. Mm-hmm. But in any case, the American diet is ubiquitously and severely micronutrient deficient. And the micronutrients refer to the food factors for survival, longevity, and health that do not contain calories, like vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and antioxidants. So I'm saying that the standard American diet, because it's so high in processed foods and oils and animal products, it doesn't contain a significant load of micronutrients, especially antioxidants, phytochemicals, and certain vitamins. It's so low that the body builds up more toxins and ages very, very rapidly. But I'm also saying that as you achieve micronutrient excellence, it gives you an instinctual desire for the right amount of calories, and you no longer become a calorie-consuming monster having to overeat to keep your energy up. And so what I'm saying right now is that when your diet isn't nutritionally adequate, it makes people want to eat more calories, and they can't control that. And they have to become overweight because their diet is too micronutrient deficient or or micronutrient, unsatisfactory. The body can't produce the type of cell repair. The machinery can't be turned on. You can't reduce reactive oxygen species. You can't produce enough energy from the right amount of calories. Because like when you're taking in white flour, that's a drug. It's not even it's not even a food. You try to process it for energy, and there's no cofactors and phytochemicals. The body has to convert it to fat, leaving you convert it into fat instead of producing energy out of it. So you're left fatigued, and you got to eat more food to keep your energy up. So what I'm saying is that there are a lot of different mechanisms that drive overeating behavior that leads people to become overweight. And one of these major mechanisms is micronutrient insufficiencies.
So if you're able to increase your micronutrient or nutrient density in your foods, you will technically eat less because your body won't be asking for more and more food because it's getting what it needs to function properly and to repair things and to grow and to do all the things that it needs to do to run a healthy machine.
That's right. And I'm making this radical statement. I'm saying that heart attacks and strokes and high blood pressure and diabetes and high cholesterol and dementia and cancer are unnatural to the human species, not the inevitable consequence of aging, not the result of genetics, the result of poor lifestyle, poor habits, and poor eating habits that break down the body, and that we can make our body cancer-proof, COVID-proof, high blood, heart attack-proof. We don't have to worry about these diseases. And living life into our later years without fear, with enthusiasm, passion, creativity, and excitement, and enjoying our years in later life. Most Americans get over the age of 60 and they're a couch potato, and they're living and they're mostly their involvements in life goes to going to doctors, taking drugs and getting medical procedures and living in fear of something bad happening to them. They have no quality of life when you're constantly worried about something bad happening to you and constantly being checked and, for cancer and watching for heart attacks and monitoring blood tests. And it's all this craziness based on what people put in their mouth.
It is interesting too, because if you start looking at other mammals on the planet, they don't have these issues. I mean, gorillas don't die of heart attacks.
They do in captivity because when they feed them kibble. It's right. Exactly right. Gorillas in the wild have no heart attacks, only in captivity, when they feed them like kibble, like dog food kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. We feed them junk food. That's the craziest thing in the world. Why have a gorilla in captivity that's not feeding their natural diet that they would be eating in the wild? It's like giving
a koala steak. It doesn't really make sense. It's the
craziest thing in the world what we do to these gorillas in captivity. But I read an article on this recently that a lot of the gorillas in captivity, some of the zoos and people that house them are trying to clean up their diet and replicate their natural diet to have better health than those gorillas.
So that's such an interesting thing, because we've been told so often throughout at least the last 100 years or more that as you get older, you get dementia, you get heart attacks, you get high blood pressure, you get high cholesterol. These are things that just happen because you're getting older.
Right.
And now the science is coming out and the information's coming out. They're like, no, it's really not a thing. It's like, in the 1800s, yeah, the lifespan wasn't as long, but they didn't have nearly as much. I don't even know if there was a lot of cancer or if there was a lot of heart. I don't know.
We have records back, for the medical profession, seeing that there was hardly any ever cancer reported until the 17th century, when the first cancers they recorded in any significant amount were scrotal and testicular cancers found in men who worked as chimney sweeps from inhaling all the smoke. But most of the people who lived in a more poor lifestyle were eating more plant foods, and that they grew on their own farms, and they really couldn't afford to have all the rich foods that maybe the kings and queens of the higher class was eating. So yes. So there was very little of common diseases, but of course there were high infant mortality, high infection mortality. There was a lot of 1 in 9 women died during childbirth. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the Renaissance artists who lived in the 14th century, their average age of death was greater than the average age of men today, because they lived longer than men live today, because they were people that survived their childhood in order to produce works of art. And they were males who didn't die giving birth to children, so they lived, so the males. So in any case, we're not living longer today than ever before. We're just having less infant and childhood mortality. But with the adults aren't living longer unless you can, especially people in Ukraine now being killed with war. But a lot of people in prior generations got killed during wartime and fighting and all kinds of, things that cut short their violence, that cut short their life. Mm-hmm. We have an opportunity. The human lifespan should live easily between 95 to 105 without these serious illnesses, with full mental faculty and fully able to be active and enjoying your life. I remember, what's his name, who wrote The Good Life? I forgot his name. Anyway, if it comes to me, I'll mention he was a MIT scholar who lived in Maine and built his own greenhouse and made his own food. And he died at 101 because he felt kind of fatigued. He couldn't work full time anymore. And he had a big party to celebrate his life. And then he fasted himself to death at 101 years old. But I'm just showing that a lot of these healthy people I knew and that I have known in my medical career who ate healthfully through a lot of their lives, had very, very long lives and almost all past 95 years old.
Now, you mentioned that the word nutritarian.
Scott Nearing.
Nearing.
Have you heard of him, Scott Nearing?
I've heard of that, dude.
He was an MIT scholar. He used to be an economics professor, and he wanted to show people how you can live off the land and not have to spend a lot of money and still have a good life. And he built it. And he did it in Maine where it wasn't a warm climate. He grew all his own food, but anyway, he lived to be 101 years old in great health.
Now, you've used the term nutritarian. What is the nutritarian diet consist of?
Right. The word nutritarian obviously refers to a diet that people are eating to maximize their health and longevity. Right. That means we're eating a diet rich in nutrients, particularly rich in vegetables, because we're vegetable dependent animals, and we're eating a lot of nutritional variety. We have a wide variety of foods that we're eating, especially G-bombs, greens and beans and onions and mushrooms and berries and seeds and different types of foods, because we know that the blue zones around the world, where people living 5 to 10 years longer than average, are not eating great diets. They're just better than the average American diet or standard Western diets or European diets, but they're not eating a diet that's scientifically designed to have the nutrient density and variety of foodstuffs, variety of plant material, that we can design from scratch a diet that blows the blue zones out of the water. And that's what the nutritarian diet does. It's using the epidemiologic studies, the historical studies, the blue zone studies, and the randomized controlled trials to pick the foods with the most powerful anti-cancer effects, immune system strengthening effects, and longevity building effects, and put that together in a dietary portfolio to maximize the health of humans. And then we see that, mushrooms have ergothioneine and other longevity factors in them, and they're anti-angiogenic. And green cruciferous vegetables are the richest source of isothiocyanates, which the most powerfully activate the cellular repair machinery that silences genetic alterations that could lead to disease. So I'm saying right now that when you think genetics don't play a major role in disease outcomes, because when you eat healthfully, genetic defects get silenced and also repaired. And the BRCA1 gene, the GSTP1 gene that increases risk of breast cancer for women, do not increase risk of breast cancer in women eating a nutritarian diet, let's say, because we gene silence those abnormal gene defects. I am saying that that our genes are reflective of what we're eating, that our genes are modifiable and change their expression based on what we eat. So we're not looking at our genes to tell us what we should eat. We're eating to shape the development and function of our genes. And they work together, obviously, and the body has the ability to repair methylation defects, broken DNA cross-links, and other. So our body really has incredible, miraculous self-healing properties when we put all these right foods in, including greens and mushrooms and onions and berries and seeds, particularly like things like flax seeds and chia seeds and sesame seeds and hemp seeds and all these, and walnuts, things like that. And fascinating research that shows us when we have the ability to eat a diet with this wide amount of plant material, then the body becomes really disease-proof.
Now, what is the difference between fast and slow food?
Right. Well, people consider fast food what you purchase in a fast food restaurant, of course.
Correct.
But we know that anything that you buy in a package or a bag that's a Twinkie or a donut or some kind of candy, we're saying that fast food are things that you can just open up and just eat potato chips, right? It's all fast food. But I'm also considering fast food anything made with white flour, because white flour is not a food; it's a drug. It's the same, like you're eating a cocaine equivalent. And I'm saying that because sugar, honey, maple syrup, white flour, the body doesn't differentiate. It sees it all coming in as glucose. It's a glucose load entering the body. And this major load of glucose, because white flour products like bread and bagels and pizza and hamburger buns and all these things and muffins, they enter the bloodstream very rapidly. It's called a high glycemic load. It means a lot of glucose went into the bloodstream really quickly. So all this glucose into the bloodstream quickly without a significant amount of nutrients. There's no nutrients. It's just the glucose. When the body has that huge load coming in fast, then the concentration of calories coming in fast all at once in the bloodstream signals dopamine receptors in the brain, and the same brain centers for stimulation that opiates stimulate, like and narcotics. So the extra rush of calories in the blood drive addiction to those substances and give you cravings, because over time you become more dopamine insensitive and the body starts to require more dopamine stimulation. And then you need concentrated calories to repeat that dopamine stimulation to keep yourself feeling even normal. So you're overly dependent on dopamine stimulation from the excess dopamine stimulating effects of the rush of calories into the bloodstream. And the other source of fast food or fast calories are oil, because people are eating a lot of their fats from oil, which puts so much calories so rapidly in the bloodstream that makes them, it's just a huge appetite stimulant and very fattening. Most Americans get most of their fat from either oil or animal fats. They're not getting their fat from food like nuts and seeds. So I'm saying it's walnuts, not the walnut oil. It's sesame seeds, not the sesame oil. It's pistachio nuts, not the pistachio oil. When you get your fats from these whole nuts and seeds, the fat calories come into the bloodstream slowly, not fast. And when the fat calories enter the bloodstream slowly, 1 or 2 calories a minute, the body preferentially burns it for energy. It doesn't even store it as fat. But when fat calories rush in at 50 calories a minute from oil, then the body has no choice but to store it as fat right away and turn on fat storage hormones and fat storage mechanisms and inhibit fat loss, and then increase the appetite to get more energy because you no longer have the calories in the blood. So it's all very abnormal for humans to be getting fat from oils. Oils are not a natural food for any animal species on the earth, and any primate or any human. It's a processed food that's been designed. And I see it as the biggest scam perpetrated on the world's population is convincing them that oil is a health food. And while everybody's overweight and fat, they're consuming 500 calories of oil a day and thinking they can lose weight, and they can't. It's almost impossible. But so that's right. It's a fast food. Mm-hmm. And the slow food carbohydrate is like beans, peas, soy, chickpeas, lentils. Then the carbohydrates come in real slowly into the bloodstream. The beans and these other types of carbohydrates have very high in slowly digestible carbohydrates and very high in resistant starch. So you get the calories coming into the bloodstream slowly, so the body doesn't have to produce much insulin to keep the glucose curve level, because the calories are coming in very gradually. And of course, insulin is another growth hormone that promotes fat storage and sets the stage for later life diseases. The hallmark of all long-lived people or healthy centenarians is they're insulin sensitive, and the body doesn't have to make much insulin. They're not stressing out the insulin production by taxing it with high glycemic carbohydrates like white bread and white rice and sugar and honey and sweeteners. So we're talking here about getting your carbohydrate from fruits and vegetables and beans, and getting more protein from greens and beans and nuts and seeds. And obviously, your body functions completely differently.
Now, what are some of the most nutrient-dense foods that you can recommend?
Well, green vegetables are the most nutrient-dense foods. And one of my mantras is to tell people to have a salad, a big salad, at least once a day. Here's the mantra. The salad is the main dish. That is it. And at least once a day, they should be eating a big salad in a 9-inch salad bowl, chopping up a mixture of lettuce, dark green lettuce, with half of some cruciferous green like bok choy, cabbage, arugula, baby kale. We have this unprecedented opportunity in human history to slow aging and live longer because we have access to all these incredible foods today. Almost all over the United States, we can get it. And we can get sprouts and microgreens and baby lettuces and things like that our ancestors couldn't get. I couldn't even see those foods in the marketplace when I was a child. You didn't have so much access to healthy food. And somebody's buying them, they're making them, they don't be producing them. Some people are aware of the incredible health benefits of these type of microgreens and baby lettuces and cruciferous greens, because they're selling it in bags and boxes of these green productions or green vegetable production. So eating a salad every day is critically important to humans. We are a green vegetable dependent animal, like all the other primates are. I always tell people, if you don't want to eat green vegetables, you better live close to a hospital, because you can't have good health if you don't. We're a green vegetable dependent animal. And I say that the consumption of raw vegetables has the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all type. But in addition to the greens we're talking about, both green raw vegetables and green cooked vegetables and green cruciferous vegetable family, like broccoli and cabbage and bok choy, that family too. And then we have the other G bombs, the other bombs. The G stands for greens, and the BOMBS stands for beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. So we're talking about getting a lot of our carbohydrate needs met from beans when as possible, like a cup of beans every day of different types. Chickpeas, lentils, peas, things like that. And then onions and scallion and green onion is very, very powerful anti-cancer, longevity promoting effects, also anti-diabetic and blood pressure lowering effects. And then you have mushrooms, which are the most powerful anti-angiogenic food. The word angiogenesis means the production of new blood vessels to fuel the growth of fat, which simultaneously fuels the growth of cancer cells. And mushrooms don't let you fuel the growth of fat or fuel the growth of cancer cells. They prevent new blood vessels bringing new blood and oxygen and nourishments to feed abnormal growth of tissue. So we're eating foods that feed abnormal growth, and mushrooms say, no way, Jose, I'm not letting you fuel abnormal growth. And if you
don't mind me asking, what are some of the mushroom species that are really good to eat? I mean, obviously there's the crimson mushrooms, but there's some more exotic ones that I've seen a lot of supplements about, like for the brain function and things like that. What do you recommend as far as the kind of mushrooms to eat?
Well, I do recommend people eat the simple basic mushrooms that are least expensive too. Those types are white button mushrooms, cremini, brown mushrooms, and portobello mushrooms are the same type of mushroom. And then then we also recommend people buy a lot of shiitake mushrooms. Those are the ones that have the umbrella cap with that little dirt nib on the bottom. You cut off the little dirt nib, but you eat the whole stem and the whole umbrella cap, the shiitake. But then buying, oyster and trumpet and lion's mane and chanterelle and all these different other mushrooms, whatever available in your marketplace. And some of them are quite expensive. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they could be, $10 a pound or more, but it's okay. Because I'm saying it's okay to spend your money, because you don't need that much of that stuff.
Right.
Even a half a pound, even $6 worth of those mushrooms are going to be good for 3 nights to sprinkle in your dishes, because even a little bit of mushrooms added to your diet have tremendous powerful effects on longevity. There was a study on a huge cohort of Asian women that showed that people who ate 10 grams of mushrooms a day had a 64% lower risk of developing breast cancer compared to women who eat no mushrooms. And the 10 grams is the size of your thumb. That's just a little bit of mushroom. So it showed these studies that have shown the effects of even a small amount of mushrooms have incredibly powerful effects at improving body's immune function and lifespan. And we're not recommending 10 grams a day, of course. We're recommending people have 30 to 50 grams a day, have much more mushrooms than that, like a quarter cup of mushrooms or a third of a cup. But even at 10 grams a day, even at just a spoonful a day of mushroom has a beneficial effect on your health. But so even if you can't afford to get a huge amount, still buy some mushrooms and try to go with some mushroom variety. I usually get shiitake mushrooms as a base in a soup or a dish. And I always add like one other mushroom to it, like white button or a little chanterelle or a little trumpet or a little something mixed in with the shiitake, because I love the shiitake. They're so chewy and you know, like the mouthfeel is, you know, add some substance and chewiness to the food, and they're really great.
Now, I've heard you discuss the beans and the second meal effect. What is that?
It means that beans have so much resistant starch that they fuel the growth of beneficial bacteria in the gut more than other foods do. The other foods that fuel the growth of the most beneficial bacteria flora in the gut are the green vegetables raw and the onions raw. But the mushrooms are mostly cooked and the beans are mostly cooked. Beans are well cooked. Beans have a lot of resistant starch, but the combination of those four foods thicken the microbiome that covers the villi in the small intestines. And scientists call the thickened coating on the villi, they call it the biofilm. This biofilm of active living cells that aren't part human, but they're bacteria, produce nutrients, help us complete the protein that we eat from vegetables, and also slow the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. So when we eat a mango for breakfast or some oatmeal and a banana, the glycemic load of that breakfast is lowered because we ate the beans and the greens, and we have a thickened biofilm, which then eases the glucose into the bloodstream, reducing the amount of insulin that needs to be produced. So scientists call that the second meal effect, which means that the glycemic effect of that meal has been blunted by the fact that you're regularly eating greens and beans and mushrooms, particularly beans.
Interesting. And yeah, beans and legumes as well.
Beans and legumes, I use that interchangeably. Beans, another way of saying legumes. And the combination of the greens and the onions and the mushrooms and the beans, also scientists call it gene silencing that I mentioned, that these foods not only develop a favorable microbiome, but they also penetrate into every cell in our body and activate the antioxidant response element in the cell that repairs the cell damage. And here's the thing. It gene silences any defects in the cell. So if you've inherited something bad that can increase your risk of disease, that's recognized and silenced and not allowed to cause a problem. So when you're eating right, your genes, negative genes, don't have a chance to cause any negative effects. And scientists call that gene silencing.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the microbiome and what it does to our health? And it's something that is really starting to come into the zeitgeist a little bit more in recent years, but a lot of people didn't even think about the gut or the gut flora or anything like that. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and people are thinking they're taking these probiotic pills with acidophilus and bifidus and thinking yogurt's good, but we're finding out with more research that the most longevity-promoting microbiome that slows aging and communicates with our immune system are gram-positives that have the most biological diversity. So it's having the most wide diversity of different types of gram-positive organisms that slow aging and support the growth of the healthiest immune function. Because your immune system is, you could say, concentrated around the digestive tract. Mm-hmm. They call it the interstitial lymphocytes that surround the digestive tract that are fueled by the aryl hydrocarbon receptors, which are then fueled by green vegetables. So what I'm saying right now is that our immune system is concentrated around the digestive tract, and it's fueled by the microbiome there and the interaction between the cells that are living, the bacteria that are living there, which then don't let yeast forms and viruses and bacteria penetrate through, and it allows it to penetrate through so slowly or with such small concentrations that the immune system can recognize and engulf those and deactivate them quickly. It's when you have, and of course, when you're eating like meats and sweets, let's say, you have more gram-negative organisms, more yeast forms, and when you have this these negative gram negatives bacteria, you produce more and more animal protein choline. You produce more TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which then is a pro-inflammatory substance that increases risk of cancer, dementia, and of course, atherosclerosis increases risk of heart disease tremendously. From the type of bacteria you just grew, that you're giving a favorable expression to have those growing, those unhealthy bacteria in the digestive tract versus crowding them out and fueling and having all the good bacteria. So we're saying that the legumes, the chickpeas and the lentils and the greens, these foods, and even the mushrooms and the onions are the best probiotic or prebiotic to grow the health of these good bacteria. And then you have postbiotic products, which means the bacteria themselves produce nutrients and support immune function and communicate with the rest of the body and the brain to improve our health and to improve our immune recognition of abnormal cells and invade and microbes that can invade us.
Fascinating. I've heard you say before that nuts and seeds can really, truly help heart disease. Can you discuss a little bit about that?
Yes, it's really fascinating that it's wild that people are consuming nuts and seeds have such lower rates of cardiovascular death. We're saying that most studies show about a 40% reduction in cardiovascular death from the regular consumption, the daily consumption of nuts and seeds in the diet. And you could say, well, that's because people are eating nuts and seeds instead of oil, or they're eating nuts and seeds instead of meat. Maybe they cut the meat down and ate more nuts and seeds. But that's not what the study shows. It shows with every cohort we're looking at, whether it's a person eating a fish-based diet or a meat-based diet or a vegan diet or a near vegan or a flexitarian diet or an unhealthy diet or a healthy vegan or a not healthy, that when we looked at every cohort, it held up still beneficial effects on longevity. And we're talking about reducing all-cause mortality, meaning cancer as well as heart attacks and strokes and seizures and irregular heartbeats and infection, that nuts and seeds have beneficial effects on human longevity. That what I'm saying right now and what you asked me is to make the strong point that nuts and seeds should be the fat source, the fatty food that humans eat to get their fats, should come from nuts and seeds and avocado, not from animal products and oils. Because when we do that, we magnificently improve human health and longevity.
Now, with nuts, though, the thing I've heard, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, is that with something like almonds or pistachios, in nature, you need to work to get to that nut. So for you to actually get an almond is going to take a tremendous amount of effort to break through the husk and all that stuff to get the one almond. But now we have...
That's not true.
Okay, well, let's say with pistachios, it's
a human can take a rock and smash open an almond in 2 seconds.
Okay, but that 2 seconds is a lot more seconds than buying you could literally get a bag of almonds and eat, 100 almonds without thinking about it. Is that too many calories, or do we need to worry about that? Should we watch how many nuts we eat?
No, we should watch everything we eat, not overeat of any food, because our total calories for the day matter. But what I'm saying right now is when your nutrient levels are low, you can become a calorie-consuming machine. You can sit there and eat a whole bag of almonds.
Got it.
But when you're getting enough greens and beans and mushrooms and onions and berries, and you're eating enough nutrients, you're not going to want to overeat. You're going to feel instinctual cutoff point. You're not going to really being an overeating machine. So we're not saying that people can't emotionally overeat, or haven't been trained to overeat since they were young and still have perverted styles of eating that have to be retrained. That's for true. And people could use nuts to overeat on. We're not justifying, you could overeat on fruit and vegetables too, but nuts are calorically concentrated. So is avocado. And so is things like you can overeat on even rice. But the point is of course, that you can easier overeat on nuts because it's 175 calories per ounce. Mm-hmm. So let's say if you had 2 ounces of nuts, that would be, let's say, 350 calories a day, which would be reasonable. But if you ate, 1,000 calories from nuts a day on top of your other food, it would be, obviously. What I'm saying is using nuts as your fat source, you use it judiciously, like a half an ounce to an ounce with each meal. I could eat an ounce with each meal because I'm doing a lot of athletics. But a person looking to lose weight can still have half an ounce with each meal and still have an ounce and a half of nuts a day. And that's not going to be that. And when the scientific studies show that when you change let's say you had 200 to 300 calories of nuts and you reduced your calories from carbohydrate accordingly by 200, 300 calories. You have more weight loss and more satiation of hunger by including the 200, by reducing the carbohydrates down. So when you move things isocalorically, the same amount of calories, let's say your calories are 1,600 for the day. When you keep it 1,600 for the day, but you take in more nuts and less potato or rice, then you've got better health, more longevity. But obviously, if you're going to snack on foods and emotionally eat and use nuts to gain weight, then you're going to not be in great health, because any time you have fat on the body, you're not going to have good health. And there's no such thing as an overweight, healthy person. All overweight people are shortening their lifespans. And if you're going to eat to keep yourself overweight, because we want to modulate our food intake to get our perfect body weight, and modulate our protein intake and modulate our fat intake. So part of being a nutritarian isn't just eating one kind of food and overeating on it. It's knowing when to eat and how much to eat too, right? Because we want to be at our perfect weight. So my perfect weight, for example, at the age of 68, my body fat is about 10%. And I say for a male to be in good health, he has to have his body fat below 15%, but preferably lower than that, preferably below 12%. For a woman to be in good health, she has to have her body fat below 25%. Maybe even ideally below 23%. But at least we can't just eat anything, or as much of these things as we want. We have to, but I'm saying is you're not going to want to overeat those things when you really learn how to eat healthy, learn the recipes, and and of course, we have the ability to control our health destiny. We can't just eat, and we have to, and that entails moderate caloric restriction to slow the aging process.
Can you dive into that a little bit?
Restriction is made possible because you're comfortable eating less calories when you're eating the right food, and it becomes impossible to do because you're uncomfortable eating less calories when you eat the wrong food.
So, which brings me to another question. What do you think about intermittent fasting? Is that something that is beneficial long-term?
It can't be answered simply.
Okay.
Because we have so much of our population is overweight. Right? And these overweight people, when they start to intermittent fast to lose weight, they're so emotionally attached to food and addicted to food that it sometimes triggers binge eating or yo-yoing their weight. And they go on these diets that are too strict, utilizing intermittent fasting or fasting as a means to get their weight down. Then they bounce back and overeat. And it triggers them emotionally now. And their metabolic rates are slowed down by fasting. And now with excessively slowed down, I should say. And then when they're eating more calories, they gain weight even back again. And if you're so there's too much of a high probability for people with an addictive relationship with food or emotional overeaters to utilize fasting and then binging and fasting and binging to yo-yo their caloric intakes too much. That's not going to be in their best interests. For most overweight people, we see better long-term results at achieving and maintaining a normal weight if they develop a feeling for repetition and doing the same thing every day, week in and week out, losing weight gradually and slowly till they get to their perfect weight, till they know how to live now. So I can intermittent fast because I'm not overweight, and it's not going to lead me into a binge. But if you haven't mastered your diet and your weight, then you don't want to go to these extreme caloric restrictions until you can get your regular pattern of eating every day to get you to achieve an ideal weight. You following me? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Too much chances of blowing this up and yo-yoing, which is so bad for your health. And then the major factor via which intermittent fasting slows aging and extends human lifespan is not having food in your stomach when you're sleeping at night. And so we're talking about eating a lighter and earlier dinner and finish eating dinner at least 4 hours before bedtime, so the meal has a chance to totally digest. So when you go to bed at night, you're not digesting food. So yes, if that's called time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, then I'm agreeing with it. But I'm going on these diets of 500 calories a day for 4 days in a row and then going back to your normal way of eating again to keep your weight under control. It has a history, a very poor success rate and a history of long-term failure. Even the people that go on water fasts for 2 or 3 weeks and they lose a lot of weight, if you follow them a year or two later, they're a heavier weight 2 years later or a year later than they were before they started that fast. because it did not result in permanent weight loss because it slowed their metabolic rate down so much. And they went back to eating again, which they have the tendency to, they're like, now they're thinking about food in such an emotional way that they're triggering their desire to overeat, and then they put back weight on again. So I'm really into these days of people taking the initiative and teaching them they have to persevere over time with a repetition of the right way of eating day in and day out, and to lose weight at 2 or 3 pounds a week until they get to their ideal weight, and keep it going in that direction, and then live that way for the rest of their life. And if they want to put some fasting on top of that, they could, but it's not the means to lose weight, and it's not going to be a major portion of their therapy until they learn how to eat right.
Now, what are some fat loss promoting foods?
Fat loss promoting foods? Mm-hmm. Well, the same foods we were talking about that prevent cancer have effects to reduce fat storage in the body, the G-bombs. So we're saying the same 4 foods: the beans, the cooked foods are the beans and the mushrooms cooked, and the raw foods are the greens and the onion and scallion raw. That same combination of food, having the big salad every day for lunch, having the bowl of vegetable and bean soup with the onions and mushrooms in it, and a little fruit for dessert. It's the style of the diet that makes you lose weight effortlessly, because we have at both major meals, we have some cooked food and raw food. So at lunch, we have a salad with some cooked soup or chili or something with some soup. And then for dinner, we have some raw vegetables with a dip or a sauce. Maybe different raw vegetables than you had at lunch, maybe peppers and bok choy and snow pea pods and carrots and jicama. And then we have a cooked vegetable wok with cabbage and mushrooms and onions and snow pea pods and water chestnuts and maybe a Thai curry sauce on that, and maybe some frozen fruit whipped up to a nice dessert. But every meal has those features of raw vegetables, cooked vegetables, beans and nuts, and a little fresh fruit, except for breakfast, which was mostly probably just a little grain with some fruit and plant milk, so it's some seeds on top, like flax seeds or chia seeds or something. So we keep it not too complicated so people can reproduce this. And we make it with great tasting recipes, including great tasting desserts that are made predominantly from fruit with no sweetener agents that taste really great by like whipping up frozen fruits into like ice creams and things. But so we make a really great tasting plan that people can feel satisfied with, and not having to eat thimble-sized portions of food. They can eat enough volume of food to feel satiated and still watch their weight come down. We had a person here at the retreat this first month who lost 50 pounds in the first month. And I said to him, he asked me, what's the most weight a person ever lost in the first month? And I said, it's not a race, and it doesn't matter how fast you lose it, but I don't think anybody's lost more than like 40 pounds. So he said, I'm beating it. I'm going to 50 pounds this month. So we walked in the pool, and the saltwater pool, like half the day I said, so he's not losing that much weight this month. He's only losing about 30 pounds the second month. But most people eventually, wind down to losing about, 10, most people lose 20 pounds the first month, 15 pounds the second month. Then they kind of hover at 10 pounds a month usually until they get close to their ideal weight. So they're losing usually about 2 pounds a week. And then they might go within 10 pounds of their ideal weight down to a pound a week. But the bottom line is there's a nutritarian is a person at their perfect weight or moving there in that direction. Because if you're overweight and you're not moving in the right direction, then you're not following the program right. Then you're doing something wrong. Could be overeating on nuts, or even overeating dried fruit. But if you want to do this right, and you're overweight, you have to be losing steadily on the way to your ideal weight.
Now, what is the most important meal of the day?
Lunch, unquestionably. Lunch is when people should be eating that big salad and the bowl of vegetable bean soup, or, yes, I want like if I'm out busy something, I may be out with my family or doing something. I may skip dinner or just have some fruit for dinner or something, or a handful of nuts for dinner, but I'm not going to skip that big salad, of raw vegetables, and take the time to chew it and really break down all those nutrients in your mouth and get that really healthy meal in for lunch every day.
Now, I'm going to ask you.
I could change my, most days for breakfast, I may have a little grain and a little bit of seeds and berries and fruit. And today I had some apricots and some figs and, whatever. But if I'm busy on work, I could maybe just have a piece of fruit. I'm not going to have the seeds of the cereal. I could skip it or change it around, but I'm not going to change my habit of having that big salad for lunch every day. I could change the breakfast a little bit someday. I could skip it. I could change it up, but just I'm in a rush having an Ezekiel English muffin or something in the car, but I'm not going to change my big salad for lunch.
Do you recommend breads, or should we watch the bread intake that we have?
I recommend not having flour, breads made from flour, but like I buy the Ezekiel Food for Life brand, which are made from sprouted grains.
What's the difference?
It's the glycemic load that's different, because when you grind some of these, we're already talking about white flour as being a drug and not even a food. It's like, that's no brainer, But now what about these whole grain breads that are made with whole wheat flour? You know what I mean? That's the question. And they're an intermediate food because because they grind the whole wheat flour and make it so finely ground that it's still probably unfavorably glycemic. If you had one slice of bread, with a healthy meal, it's not a big deal. But the best breads, if you're going to use bread, and they taste good too, are the Food for Life Ezekiel brand, which are made from sprouted grains, which have lower in sodium, higher in protein, and lower glycemic than the whole wheat flour made bread. You know what I mean? Because they're made from they take the grain and they sprout it and then they grind it up a little bit and make it into a loaf, bake it into a loaf. So it's naturally lower glycemic and more nutrient rich. So it's just a better quality bread.
Got it. And then how about like all these new flours like cassava flour or chickpea flour, almond flour, these kind of products that are like I have a tortilla made of cassava flour, to get away from the gluten and things like that. Is that kind of good food to eat?
It's okay. I think people could eat those in moderation. I've seen like tortillas and wraps made out of cauliflower too. You ever see those?
Yeah, those are good.
Cauliflower wrap. They're not eating that much of the wrap anyway. You're stuffing it with mushrooms and avocado and sprouts and tomatoes and onions. Since you can make a nice healthy wrap. I put some of a basil. I take like roasted garlic and hemp seeds with a little bit of basil and what am I putting? A little nutritional yeast in there and a little bit of, making these delicious dressings or a dip made for the wrap, and then putting a wrap around it and carrying on the plane with me when I'm traveling or something. You know what I mean? So yeah, you can use some of those wraps. You're not eating that much wrap anyway. So yeah, those sound all reasonable, but we're not eating it's not a major portion of our diet anyway.
Right. It's a wrapping.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a wrapping. Now everything we've talked about, we're talking about obviously longevity, but I've heard you talk about actually reversing aging or aging backwards. Is everything that we're talking about in that world of trying to turn the clock back, if you will, instead of extending it?
I know there are some scientists and people and physicians and people saying you can't age backwards. That's ridiculous. But I'm saying, no, you can age backwards. We've proven that. We see it all the time. Every day I see it. It's the only time, but I'm not aging backwards because I've been eating right a long time. I'm just aging slower. But when these people come into our retreat, let's say, or they come from an unhealthy diet, there's measurable biological aging determinants like their telomere length, their epigenetic changes, and we can measure the inflammation in their bloodstream. And then we can measure them again. The telomeres represent your biological age and your epigenetic changes. We can see how fast you're aging and how fast you have aged. So maybe you're 60 years old, but you have the body of an 80-year-old based on your blood tests or your swabs of and then after you eat healthfully for 6 months, we see the telomeres went back to normal. Now you're a 60-year-old with 60-year-old telomeres, not a 60-year-old with 70-year-old telomeres. You follow me?
Right.
So you see unhealthy people age backwards as they get really healthy. You understand that? So people are aging backwards, but we're not really aging backwards. We're just bringing them back to where they should have been if they were eating healthfully. And they've just accelerated the aging process. So they have an abnormal accelerated aging that we're just repairing back again. So it's like aging backwards. I'm not aging backwards. I'm still aging, but we're not, because I didn't get myself in a bad shape to begin with. So I have to age backwards. You follow me?
I know. I understand what you're saying, but also there are times where you could be a 50-year-old, but have a 30-year-old's internal scenarios based on the blood type and blood work. If you're eating compared
to the average 50-year-old.
Correct. Exactly.
And I'm also making the radical statement that the average lifespan should be between 95 and 105, not between 70 and 90, where most Americans die around age 77, 78. So we're talking here about living to be around 100 years old, having good health and your full mental faculties intact.
Now, I'm going to ask you two questions I ask all my guests. What is your mission in this life?
I have my own personal missions and business missions, but my mission in life is to be happy, enjoy the world around me, and have a positive effect on as many people as I can to improve their health and happiness. And you can only do that if you're in good health yourself.
Right.
If you're not taking care of your own health and your own happiness and well-being, then you can't have a good positive effect on other people. I'd love to have an effect on the planet as well, but we're seeing the planet being destroyed. But there's so much negativity and short-sighted thinking, and I'm saying here that I think the instantaneous gratification and the food addiction mentality has led people to think and behave for instant gratification and not think of the effects that we're having on the world collectively, and enables us to destroy the environment for our children and grandchildren, destroy the planet, which includes climate change, and also the promotion of aggression, contempt for other humans, the one country trying to beat out another country, and the increased competition between humans, and wars and killing each other, which we're seeing today. In today's climate, we're seeing, climate change, wars, and also an acceleration of hate among Americans against immigrants and people from other countries, and people who have different backgrounds and different educations and different, we're not cultivating, a concern for people all over the world, a collective well-being for the earth, compassion for all humans, no matter what they like us or not, stopping wars and working together as a unified planet, our own, sharing this one spaceship to protect the planet for our children and grandchildren, future generations. We're not having that happen. And so, in some ways, I'm disappointed I can't do more, but we all do the best we can and do as much as we can. And I think the nutrition has a huge part to do with all this, and it fuels people's aggression and mental illness, and their ability to be more narcissistic is fueled by their poor diets. And so that's my niche. Is I can't do everything. I'm just doing what I can do in the niche that I've chosen to live in. And I've really, as you know, have very passionate about motivating people to take better care of their health.
Now, where can people pick up your book, Eat for Life, and all your other amazing products and courses and services and so on?
Thank you. Well, my website's drfuhrman.com, drfuhrman.com, but you can buy those books anywhere, bookstores, Amazon, I sell. And I have a lot of my work has actually been shown a lot on public television, on PBS in the United States. Mm-hmm. They have run a lot of my shows over the last 10 years. So I've been blessed to have gone into the living rooms and bedrooms with people across America, speaking about motivating them to take better care of their health, because they don't get that from anybody. They don't get it anywhere practically, right? They go through grade school, and the most important things they should have learned to protect their life, they learn nothing about it.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had to be able to have an effect on hundreds of thousands of people. That's given me a tremendous amount of pleasure, but I get so much pleasure just from helping one person. Just from seeing one person transform their life for the better, and working with that, it gives me a lot of satisfaction and pleasure as well.
Dr. Fuhrman, thank you so much for not only coming on the show, but for all the amazing work you've been doing over the years. And I truly, truly appreciate you, my friend. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Alex.